Unapologetically Gangster, the Don Kawand Story. Book 1, subtitle Marlboro and Coney Island, Story 13. Now, as a wandering teenager, I run into another member of the 10 Thieves. I must have been about 14 or 15 at the time when this dark-skinned, cross-eyed fella tried me. I was on the F train coming from Bed-Stuy, which was on the other side of Brooklyn. Now remember, my hood is surrounded by white Italians, right? So check this out. Whenever taking the F train to Coney Island to switch to a B train, one stop to Marlboro, at some point, everyone on the F train is white. Any black person on the train after the Kings Highway train station is going to either CI or the borough. This is also during the time when riding the train was treacherous. You needed to have a big heart when traveling on a train in the early 80s by yourself. Ask anybody from New York. Some kids never got on a train. That's how real it can get, especially in the last train car. But that's a different animal. Now, where was I? Oh, I'm on the F train and noticed this dark-skinned fellow on the train. Two things instantly came to mind. One, he must be some tough kid. And two, since I'd never seen him before in Marlboro, he had to live in CI. I'm sure he had the same thoughts as we curiously peeked at one another out the corner of our eyes. I had on a pretty light brown sheepskin coat, something that at the time young boys was killing for. It also symbolized a person that had a little change during such a poverty-stricken era in New York. This was in the early 80s, and poverty was at an all-time high, especially for those that lived in the projects. Being the only child, every winter Mama Love made sure I had the latest jacket and stayed warm. But anyway, he was halfway to me when I went from peeking at him to eyes locked in on his demeanor. He came over to have a conversation.
What's up, kid? From Coney Island?
What's up? And nah, I'm from Marlboro, I proudly responded. Coney Island is the last stop on the F train, so he's giving me a real friendly vibe at first. We only had a couple of stops to go. The entire time, he was chopping it up with me. My hand was on my 6-inch 007 knife. He was complimenting me on my sheepskin. He even rubbed on the elbow to feel the texture, which was test number 1. What I didn't know then, but know now, is that he was sizing me up for the kid. But he couldn't, because he didn't smell wounded prey coming out of my pores. I could see it in his eyes. He contemplated trying me the strong arm way. He was slightly taller, with an intimidating looking mean mug, but spoke smoothly. To be honest, his crossed eyes were menacing, but I didn't blink as he continued to rock me to sleep. When we reached the Coney Island train station, he slid off down a ramp that leads to the street. My journey was up a flight of stairs and over to catch the B train one stop to Marlboro. While waiting for the B train to move, I'm feeling a bit more relaxed after the bizarre conversation. But before the B train pulled off, this wolf popped up out of nowhere. Kind of startled me, but instinctively I put my hands in my pocket. My hand was gripped tightly around the knife after seeing his deadly fangs. He was mentally salivating over his next move. His eyes had straightened up and his voice was firm, unlike the conversation we had a moment ago.
Listen here, Pa.
He spoke with confidence.
Do you mind if I try on that coat? I was thinking about getting one. I want to see if it fit, so I know what size to get.
Nah, it's a 44. It could fit you, I spit out and stood firm. It can definitely fit you, Pa. I was fully aware at that age that the young boys that lived in CI were about that crook life. He laughed at the rebuttal and tried to convince me that he wasn't up to anything dubious. But I believe my posture spoke volumes. He gave it a great deal of thought before keeping it friendly and going on about his business. Test number 2. Later in life, I'd find out that this young crook's name was Flip, a thorough fellow that ran with the 10 Thieves. He had a bad reputation on the streets, and it wouldn't be long before his name was affiliated with dangerous and mischievous deeds. Not too long after our brief encounter, I would get a taste of how real them boys from Coney Island really were. This is the end of Story 13, the Don Kawand story. Stay tuned. Unapologetically Gangster, the Don Kawand Story. Book 1, subtitle, Marlboro and Coney Island, Story 14. Shortly after Rail relocated to Bed-Stuy, I found myself lounging on Bainbridge and Malcolm X Boulevard more often. We didn't have cell phones back then, so eventually he became difficult to catch up with. He started hanging out in Brownsville House with his cousins. Whenever he wasn't home, I'd catch up with my god brother Heath, aka Big Bro Heath. I'd bounce through Brevoy Projects, a cool and neutral kind of project. It didn't have a real frightening reputation like other projects. Now and then I'd run into this older brother from Marlboro named Young. He was on the run for stabbing a dude to death in Marlboro over a dice game. He would always say,
"What up, shorty? You ain't see me, aight?"
and I knew exactly what he meant. He was much older than me, so I knew who he was. I was always with Big Bro Heath when just chilling in Brevoy, more as a spectator of the dice games and basketball games under the Coliseum lights. Heath was in the mix with everything. Although he lived in East New York off Liberty Avenue at the time, his entire family lived in Bed-Stuy. His mom's side of the family had an apartment over a local bar on Fulton Street and Howard Avenue. And as a teenager, he discovered that his father's people were on Chauncey Street between Saratoga and Hopkinson Avenue. Since he attended Boys and Girls High School, that area was his stomping grounds. Our mothers were best friends, so we grew up together. As the only child from Mama Love, Heath, since he was older, would become Big Bro. He got me by close to 2 years, so whenever I was around, I pretty much watched and followed his every move. He moved through the streets with confidence, by himself. When we were kids, he had me in and out of the game rooms and candy stores on Saratoga Avenue, between Atlantic Avenue and East New York Avenue. One summer, Big Bro worked in one of the candy stores for a major player named Donnie. And even though a young pup understood that Heath was running with some hardcore kids that were in the trenches, Donnie was someone that I'd heard of but never met. He was dating and eventually had a baby with my lovely godmother, Doma. She was a gorgeous, light-skinned lady that stayed fly. She always had paper and spoiled Big Bro and me. She was the one that purchased my first gold tooth on my 14th birthday. Anyway, Doma had charisma and was feisty, something that most official gangsters admire. Therefore, I understood why this legendary street hustler found her attractive. This dude was and is legendary. He owned a bunch of stores, laundromats, and barbershops on Saratoga Avenue, as well as throughout the city. Since he was dating my godmother, he allowed Heath to work in one of the candy stores. Big Bro had access to behind the counter to every business on Saratoga Avenue that most people call Up the Hill, a place that the notorious B.I.G. referenced in his hit song, Warning. Big Bro was in the mix with everyone up the hill and on that side of town, and I'd eventually become a familiar face on Saratoga Avenue as well, mostly down the hill on Chauncey Street, not only just hanging out with Heath, but visiting my grandmother who lived on the corner of Chauncey Street and Broadway. Heath would be the gangster of my life that drilled in the phrase, "Whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen." That was his motto and eventually became mine. I remember being too young to get into the basketball games in PS 137 Park. Instead, I'd mingle with other kids in the school park. One day, a tall, slinky, light-skinned kid from Bainbridge Street tried me. Everyone in the park stopped what they were doing and watched me put the beat down on this young boy. His uncle had to drag him out of the park, crying and screaming. He wanted to continue, but the boy had no hand skill. Fortunately for me, I had been to gladiator school with Rel. My hand skills traveled with me. The boy had plenty of heart, which had to be respected. Eventually, we'd become cordial with one another, but it wouldn't be the last time my hands were employed in the neighborhood. I didn't mind putting them to work on another troublemaker from Bainbridge Street. After the brutal confrontation, my name would begin to sizzle in Bed-Stuy. This is the end of story 14, the Don Kawand story. Stay tuned. Unapologetically Gangster, the Don Kawand story. Book 1, subtitle Marlboro and Coney Island, Story 15. Everyone in Saratoga referred to me as Heath's little bro, but I'd get my own identity after a rough young boy from Bainbridge between Saratoga and Hopkinson Avenue thought that there was sugar in my tank. Gotta mention this dude that everyone called Black Vern. Vern had a little bad boy rep in the hood. We had seen each other a few times before, but he never gave up any bad vibes. I was sure he knew me because he laid his head on the same block as the light-skinned kid that experienced my hands in the park. Anyway, while walking to the store on Saratoga Avenue, we bump heads. I'm romancing with this pretty brown-skinned girl from Bainbridge Street. Believe it or not, we met at the Staten Island pool when Rel and I traveled there from Marlboro. At the pool, we were just playing around and having fun. I never got her name because I thought she lived on Staten Island, but was more than pleased to see her in bad style. I'm walking her up Bainbridge and giving her my attention. Just before we get to the corner, Vern and his two boys are brushing past. Vern was the only one to say something slick out the mouth as they went by. It was something directed to Shorty, but insulting to me. He was testing me, something Rel and I did with strangers we spotted with girls that lived in Marlboro, so I knew what it was about. In Brooklyn, it was common and dangerous to be with a female in her neighborhood, especially a pretty girl that doesn't date guys around their way. I guess that's why most guys only rock with the local girls. But remember, I'm a different type of dude. I didn't play them games. Okay, back to homeboy. Although his comments was directed at Shorty, I took it personal. We continued to the store as Shorty filled me in on his character. She could tell that his antics bothered me and did her best to get me to leave it alone. But for some reason, I was unable to let it go. So I walk her back to her house and notice the three boys across the street from where she lived. And once again, she suggested that I forget about it. But that stubborn and violent gene inherited from my real daddy ignored her every word. Therefore, once she went into the house, I went to Chauncey Street to go find Big Heath. Big Bro was with his cousin Purcell, a tall, husky fellow who, although was not my blood, referred to me as family. They walked with me back to Bainbridge Street, just to keep an eye on Vern's two friends. Vern was taller and heavier than me, but it didn't matter. Anyway, he was in front of his house, which was close to the Hopkinson Avenue corner. He was hyped and ready for some action when I approached him. The boy was not afraid, and neither was I. I must admit, when we first put our hands up, he was a little quicker. He caught me with a quick 1-2, which staggered me for a moment. It stunned me, but set a fire in my belly. I could take a punch, but it was time to see what his jaw was like. I shook off his immediate attempt to rock me and launched a couple of missiles back at him. He stumbled back on his heels, and that was the end of the knuckle game. I blacked out. Vern was in a great deal of trouble as I put hands and feet all over his body. At one point, we were in the street between two cars. He desperately tried to defend himself, but it wasn't long before he fell to the ground and things got very disrespectful. Vern got wedged up underneath the trunk of one of the cars and was no longer fighting back. Big Bro pulled me off that ass. Vern was hurt badly. The next day, my name was Sizzling. Tussling with Vern put me in the eyes of everyone on the block. He had a little rep for putting hands on the local kid. The fight sparked a great deal of animosity between most of the young fellas in the area and me. I began to receive dirty looks, but no one said anything that would have them in a serious knuckle game. From that point on, I pretty much stayed to myself. I would no longer be known as Heath's little bro. Instead, people would refer to me as Kawand, or the boy that got it on with Black Vern. Vern and I became cool, not friends, but we were friendly whenever we saw one another. As for Shorty, I never pulled up on her again. But later on in life, my name would catch fire after some gunplay with a bona fide murderer from Bainbridge Street. This is the end of story 15, the Don Kawand story. If you know a wandering young boy, subscribe, click like, and share. Cause somebody needs to hear this.